Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Lynn Monet, and she's had a near-death experience, and she's had shared near-death experience with her mother. Shared death experience, I think is what they call them. And your father had an NDE, and you've been a nurse for what, 30 some years? And
37 years.
know quite a bit about death and dying. So interested to
Hmm.
what you have to say. And so I'm going to let you take the floor. Okay.
Okay.
All
Do
right.
that. Okay. Okay, go now.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Lynn Monet. Just a little bit about me for those of you that maybe haven't heard of me before. I am an empath. I do have abilities that I'm able to see interdimensionally and see, different frequencies that a lot of times people cannot see. I have been a nurse for 37 years, and most of that, 17 years of that, has been in end of life care, geriatrics, and management. Um, I was able to see spirits at a very, very early age. My family and I lived behind a hospital 3 short blocks, and next to the hospital was a nursing home that was attached to the hospital. So my siblings and I would see spirits of people in patient gowns walking through our house, sometimes even at the same time. And of course, back in the 60s, that's not something that you talk much about because nobody wanted that to get out in the neighborhood because you literally would have men with white coats knocking on your door. So it wasn't something, it was something that was not nurtured, and families did not support it. But there was one time when I was 5 years old. I was in my mother's master bedroom, my parents' master bedroom, rather, with my brother. And I was in my mother's jewelry box, dolling myself up. And my brother was playing on the floor with his Hot Wheels or Matchbox cars, whatever they were. And I turned to show him how glamorous I had made myself. And he was fixated on the corner of the room. There was like a misting in the corner of the room. And so I turned to see what he was looking at. And in that misting stepped in his best friend, John. And behind John stepped in his mother, father, brother. And they were all just standing there smiling at us. So my brother runs out of the bedroom in one direction. I run out of the bedroom in the other direction. We're both calling for my mom. And of course, my brother finds her first and he says, Mom, John's here. John's here with his family, and they're here to visit. And she said, well, I didn't even hear anybody knock. And he says, and they're in your bedroom. And she's like, they're in my bedroom. Who let them in my bedroom? So of course my mother's coming along to see what's going on with that. And when she comes to the room, of course, there's nothing there. And my brother kind of got in trouble for that. But the next day was the first day back from spring break. And my brother normally rode the bus and sat next to John. And that day, John was not there. And then he gets to the classroom, and so he sits next to John. They share a table together, and John's not there. And after the Pledge of Allegiance, the teacher stood up in front of the class and announced that John would no longer be coming to class because he and his entire family perished in an auto accident the day before. And it happened the day that my brother and I saw John appear in my parents' bedroom. It was like he was coming to say goodbye. So things kind of started that way as I was younger. When I was about 10 years old, I was born and raised Presbyterian. My mother took a jaunt with the Jehovah's Witnesses, which is a book in itself, but we won't go there. And because I was still seeing things, my mother took me in front of the elders of the church, which is similar to like a priest or a pastor, somebody that makes the decisions in the church. And I am 10 years old standing in front of this group of men who are telling me that my gifts are demonic, what I'm seeing is demonic, that I'm possessed, and that I'm going to die in Armageddon and never wake up, and all these horrible things at 10 years old that scared me so badly that even though I continued to see things, I would run out of the room just as fast as anybody else because I thought it was a demon, even if it was something comforting like my great grandmother or something like that was a pleasant beating. But I was scared, so I would run. And it wasn't until moving forward, as a single mother with 2 children, I had purchased a house, which is my first book, Omnipresent. It was a house that was so badly haunted that I was never able to move into the house. There were two demons and a young man that had hung himself in the house, still in that home. And being exposed to all of that, I was also then connected with people of like mind and people that were also seeing things in the house the same time I was. So that I had that validation, and I started to then respect and nurture my gifts once again. And so with that being said, I went ahead and wrote a follow-up book to Omnipresent called Omnipresent: What Happened Next, which talks about, a lot of people wanted to know what had happened after that issue with the house, and it explains that I did get a hold of the family that sold me the house and what happened with their children being attacked. And also, with the ability to see interdimensionally, I had gone to further my education and did a rotation through the hospital, the psychiatric wards and things like that. And I was able to see attachments on people that were diagnosed with schizophrenia. And I was able to recognize archonic type attachments that were on the backs of people with addiction. And so I wrote the book to kind of bring light to that also, that sometimes, it's not always what the medical diagnosis is. Sometimes it can be an attachment or some kind of even a demonic attachment for that matter, kind of redirecting people off of their path. But the most recent,
I'm sorry, what kind of attachment do people have that have addiction?
They have archons. The archons look like they resemble spiders, crabs, and sometimes they look almost lizard-like. The thing that defines them, and the lizards sometimes will have a tail, sometimes they will show and present with a human buttocks. But the thing that's very distinct about them is they have very, very small heads in proportion to their body, and they have a fin type attachment from the top of their head to the base that's a fin, but it's not a rigid fin like on the back of a shark. It's more floppy. So when they're on somebody's back, it kind of hangs down like a kerchief on somebody's head, those bandana things on their head. But when a person has tried to come to terms with their addiction and get rid of it, they will detach, but they never completely go away. And they have a tendency to stay up on the ceilings, corner areas. And you can sometimes see them precede people before they come, as well as in their homes, to constantly taunt them. But the thing is that thin thing, when they are on the wall or ceiling and they turn their head, that flap kind of folds over their face. So, and it talks about that as well, and with the addiction, and that's part of the reason why it's so hard for people to get rid of the addictions, because those things, they feed off of the negativity and the rippling effect that the addiction causes for the family, the job loss, the money loss, the fighting that's caused when somebody's under the influence repeatedly and can't control themselves or contribute to life in any way, and they feed on that negative energy. So they even when a person has gone through a 12-step program, or has gone through counseling to help with their addiction, those things will detach, but they never leave. They're constantly still waiting for an opportunity to reattach because they want to continue to feed. So I wrote a section about that, and with all of my books, there's a self-help section in the back. I write of different things because I've had a lot of people contact me with, what do I do, type thing. And I try to help as many people as I can. It's hard because there are a lot of people that do need help or have questions about it. And I do answer my own emails at this time. I'm handling all of that myself. But moving forward, the book that I've just released, called The Colors of Heaven, Beginnings Never End, I wrote based on what I saw, not only through my profession. There's consistencies with people when they start transitioning, getting ready to cross over to the other side, but also because I actually saw my mother leave her own body, and I was able to see what all transpired with that. And I'd be happy to share that with you if you'd like me to.
Okay, sure. Okay.
My mom, the thing about people is that a lot of times when they're getting ready to pass away, they know it. They might go around telling people, oh, well, you take care of my cat, or I'm going home to see, Jesus tomorrow, or I'm going home to see my parents tomorrow, or I'm going to heaven tomorrow, whatever they call it. And my mother was no exception to that. She went around the facility that she was in telling everyone goodbye. And she even told a lady that she would babysit her dog for her. This lady had her dog put down 3 days before. And my mother told her that she would take care of the dog on the other side because she was going home tomorrow. And she would take care of the lady's dog until the lady could cross over there and eventually retrieve the dog. So, and lo and behold, my mother, she passed away the next day, as she said. And the thing about people too is a lot of times when they're in that transitioning period, sometimes they leave their body before the last breath, and sometimes they choose to stay in until the last minute. My mother chose to stay in until the last minute. And this was obvious to me because she was, even though she could no longer open her eyes or verbalize any words, she was mouthing words and moving her eyebrows up and down, and it was appropriate. Like people would come in and say hello to her, "Hi, Phyllis," and she would do that mouthing thing and eyebrow thing in response. So as my mother, I was sitting next to my mother's bed. I was the only one there. My brother was trying to get there and he wasn't able to get there in time. And I think that there was a reason that meant to be that way. So that I had this beautiful opportunity. My mother, she was laying in the bed with her head elevated, and I was in a recliner next to her. And I noticed as we're laying there that the other side of the room starts to mist. I mean, from wall to wall, floor to ceiling, it was misting. And I started to see movement in the misting. And sometimes I would see a pant leg stick out or a shoulder stick out. And yes, they do show up in clothes. Nobody wants to see mom naked. So they do present usually the way that you've seen them last. And as I'm sitting there, I noticed that up towards the head of my mother's bed, it starts to efface. And in this opening, my grandmother, my mother's mother, walks in, and she looked the exact same. She had the leisure suit on that she had made for herself and was buried in. She had a little like 1980s tight curly perm. She even presented with her glasses on. I mean, the exact same as I remember seeing her. And she walked over to the side of my mother's bed and started to stroke her arm, the inside of her forearm, and she leaned forward to my mother's ear and said something to her. And my mother started the mouthing thing and the eyebrow thing in response to whatever my grandmother was saying to her. Then my grandmother would raise up, that my mom would respond, and she'd go back forward. And this happened 3 different times. And while she's doing this, I see this frantic wave behind my grandmother's head. And it was my beautiful sister Robin that had been murdered by a jealous boyfriend shortly after she had turned 20 years old. And I could smell her perfume. The room just filled with the scent of her perfume. And I could feel her. It's like she came around the mist and I felt her embrace me. I could feel her hair falling over my face. I could smell her. I could feel her essence. And then she went back around I should say the misting, because now the misting had totally effaced. I mean, it was opened. I could see into where my mother was going, and there were hundreds of people in there. There were angels. There were beautiful tall beings in there that looked to be on the level of an angel, but they didn't have wings. There were just lots and lots of people in there, and there were colors on the other side that we would need a whole bunch of color wheels to accommodate the colors there. And it wasn't just about the colors. The colors, when you connect with them, there's an essence or a vibration about them that they are almost like living colors, because you like become that, if that even makes sense. And the lighting over there kind of seemed to emit from within the atmosphere itself. I didn't see like a sun lighting things or like a light source. It was just it just emitted from the atmosphere itself. And so I went to my mother's bedside and I kissed her and I told her, I said, "Mom, Grandma and Robin are here. It's time for you to go. I will be okay. I love you. We'll see each other again. Please, go with them. Let them help you cross over. And within about 10 minutes, she took her last breath. And of course, she heard me and she was doing the mouthing and the eyebrow thing in response to what I was saying. And before that happened, before the 10 minutes were up, I'm watching, and towards the head of my mother's bed, I noticed these spirits, these people spirits. They were standing towards the head of my mother's bed, and they were like in a football huddle, but they were like double layered, almost like a peony flower. They were like petaled over. And when they start to open up, I could see my mother's spirit standing in the center of them, almost like they were trying to stabilize her spiritual feet. And my mother was beaming from ear to ear. And one by one, these people were approaching her. Some of them I recognized. They were some uncles and cousins that I recognized from this lifetime. You know, they lived the same period of time with me. And there were some that I didn't recognize, but my mother did in fact recognize. And she's just so happy. And the feeling of elation that comes from the other side is, there are no words that can express it. And there's not a feeling that can touch it, but it's something that you've missed forever. And it's encompassing and so nurturing that you can't help but sit there and smile. So I am smiling from ear to ear, and I do look over at that point, and my mother has taken her last breath. And I remember thinking to myself how odd it would be that now my mother's just died if a nurse were to walk in, and here I am grinning from ear to ear, you know, that they might think I did something to her, because it's not a normal response. So I went ahead and I called the nurse, and the nurse came into the room, and she pronounced that my mother had crossed over. And I'm still watching all of these festivities going on in the room with people greeting my mother. And I asked the nurse, I said, well, can I stay? You know, I wanted to watch and see what else was going to happen. And this literally went on for like 20 minutes of our time, and time on the other side is different, but it was like 20 minutes our time. And I'm watching this. So the nurse goes back out. She kind of walks through the festivities. Nobody seemed to be bothered by it. Whoop, just lost my little microphone thing. And so as they come forward to her, the room then starts to thin out. And there's maybe about 5 of these beautiful spirits left, along with my mother. That doesn't feel right. Let's see. Sorry. And so anyway, there were like 5 of them left, and my grandmother and my sister, and they were helping her exit on my left-hand side. There were windows behind me, and I don't know if you know, they say crack a window. It might have just been a coincidence. So I don't really know. But the way that I see spirits is I can see them as clear as I can see you, and tell you what they have on, what color their hair is, at a distance or in my peripheral vision. As they come closer to me, I can see like a bottom half, but usually the upper half, I can see like a waffling to the air, kind of like gas vapors or heat off of a hot road, that waffling effect to the air. And as my mother approached, I recognized her because she had beautiful legs, and I could recognize her shapely legs underneath her patient gown. And of course it was waffling on the top as she went ahead to exit and leave. And each one of them made contact with the top of my head, and it felt tingly. And these beings that walked behind them, they were gorgeous. The one was so very tall that their head almost skimmed on the ceiling. And I'm not sure if it was male or female. It didn't really matter. It was just a gorgeous, gorgeous being. And a lot of times people, you know, with spiritual stuff, they're kind of uncomfortable. But if you want to take a scientific view of it, you know, energy can't be created or destroyed. And when we are energy, and when we do pass away, we do have to go, we go somewhere. So this is where they collect. And a lot of times too, and I know this might sound a little bit off color, but you know, we're not the only solar system out there in the world. They say that the stars are suns to other solar systems. And there are beings, probably some of them like us, on those planets. And some of the things that I saw on the other side might have been some of those that looked similar to us, like the tall being without wings, I suspect was from somewhere else, because they all have to go somewhere when they pass over. So by seeing that I wanted to relay it to people because I was hoping to take the stigma of death and dying away and help them to have a little bit of an better understanding of how that works. And I had so very many stories that I could share that would really, really bring that home as well, of things that I observed as a nurse in my nursing profession, if you'd like me to share those.
Sure. Yeah, go right
Okay.
ahead.
There were two stories that were very, very profound. One of them, I had a patient named Abigail, and Abigail had come to the facility that I was working for because her husband's health was failing, and so they were moving in so that they would have the round the clock care for him, and she just so happened to slip and fracture her hip. And so she was on my unit. And there was one day in particular that I came in, and Abigail was upset. And she asked me, she said, Lynn, she said, do you think I'm crazy? And of course, I was teasing her a little bit because I didn't think she was serious. And I'm like, define crazy, And she's like, no, like really crazy. And I'm like, well, no, of course not. Why would you even say something like that? And she said, well, I see my parents. She said, I know that my parents have passed away many years ago, but I see them and it makes me happy. She said, and they are wanting now to put me on medication for hallucinations. And this is something a lot of times people that are getting ready to pass over talk about seeing people that have already crossed over in the room while they're transitioning. And a lot of times families are uncomfortable with that. So they'll come and get the nurse to give the person medication to make them be quiet because they're not comfortable with having a dead person in the room. So I did tell her, I said, I heard in report that you're going to be discharged tomorrow morning. And as your advocate, you can refuse. You do not have to, as long as you are of sound mind and your power of attorney is on board with you, they can't force you to take any medication. So she was happy with that. They went ahead, they discharged her. She went home. About 6 months later, her health started to decline drastically. And she came back and she was on my unit again, on my side. And this time, not only was she talking about seeing her parents, she was talking about seeing a woman and a little girl. And they were so real to her that she was sneaking cookies and desserts from the resident dining room back to her room to give to the little girl, which of course was creating a bug problem, and we couldn't let her do that. So there was one day that I had volunteered to cover a shift for a friend. Normally I was a night shift nurse, and I had volunteered to cover this day shift for a friend of mine. And so I was on duty on my hallway, and all the residents are now back in their room, and I get my treatment cart ready to go down and start my treatments. And as I pass Abigail's room, I noticed that she's sitting in a recliner next to there. She had this picture window in her room with an air conditioner underneath, and she was sitting off to the side in her recliner, and she's leaning forward with this piece of yellow wrapped butterscotch candy. And there was this woman and this little girl in her room, and she was handing the candy to the little girl. And I remember passing by, and I'm like, oh, wow, Abigail's got, friends visiting today, and that's nice, But then I went 3 steps forward, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, I don't remember those people signing in at the nurses' station. And at the nurses' station, we are required to sign everybody in so that if there's an emergency and they need to have the fire department come, they need to know how many souls are in the building to get them out. So I stepped back and I knocked on the door frame, and I stepped in, and there was nothing there. But yet I could see the waffling in the air off to the side. So I knew the spirits were still there. And Abigail leans forward and she says, I want you to meet my friends. Isn't the little girl beautiful? And I said, yes, she is. And she said, can you see them? She says, don't tell anybody. They'll think you're crazy and put you on medication. So here this woman had the wherewithal, even though they were heavily medicating her for hallucinations, she was still seeing these spirits because they weren't hallucinations. And she had the wherewithal to know the difference. But there was about a month to 6 weeks that she declined over that period of time. And she was then finally on a rapid decline. She was doing the what we call rallying, which is where a lot of times they are in between dimensions, going in and out, testing the the different levels. And a lot of times they appear with their eyes kind of glazed over, half shut. Sometimes their eyes are a little bit exposed and their toes are kind of floppy. But when they come back into body, their toes perk and their eyes brighten up. And sometimes they'll even talk about seeing things on the other side, even seeing children that haven't been born. And I've got some stories about that too. And I went into her room and I stroked the inside of her arm and I said, "Hi, Miss Abigail, it's Lynn. I'm here to check your blood pressure." And her eyes brightened up and she said to me, she said, "I'm so glad that I get to see you one more time." And I said, what's going on? And she says, "Well, I'm going to go home tomorrow with my parents. They're coming to get me and I'm going to go home." And I knew what this meant. I knew that she knew that her time to cross was tomorrow. And so I told her, I said, "You precious lady," I said, "thank you so much, for allowing me to be part of your healthcare team." And she interrupted me and she said, "And I want to tell you something. You're very much loved on the other side over there, and you need to keep doing what you're doing." And it makes me cry to this day, because it was such a beautiful thing for her to say to me. I bawled. I mean, it still brings tears to my eyes. And and I told her, I said, "We will see each other again." And she said, "Oh, we most certainly will." So that was the last time during the night that she was coherent. And she rallied throughout the night, but never was responsive again. And I left my shift that morning, and about 10:30 that night, I can feel her. And she's like, "I made it home." And lo and behold, I found out that she did in fact pass away at around 10:30 that night. She went home with her parents. But and there's also another story that I have that also brings this home. I had a patient that was totally blind, could not see shadows or anything. She had been blind for 10 years. And she was relatively new to my unit. I didn't know her that well, but her son and daughter came to the nurse's station to say, "Mom's talking to people in the room that aren't there." I'm like, "Okay, let me come down with you and see if I can check on her and see if I can do something for her to make her more comfortable." And when we walked into the room, Edna was again laying at a slant, and she was reaching up into the sky like somebody was handing her something very, very delicate, like snowflake, something very fragile. And she was so happy with whatever it was she was reaching for. She was smiling. And I said, "Edna," I said, "who's here?" And she said, "George." And her daughter had to sit down because she's like, "Well, George is my father. And my father died, X amount of years ago. And George is my dad." She repeated it even a second time. And all of a sudden, Edna speaks up and she says, "And he's happy that you're taking good care of Pixie." Well, Pixie was Edna's poodle. And when her husband passed away because Edna was blind, the poodle had to be taken by the son to care for Pixie. And Pixie was an older dog, but still very much alive. And the son comes forward and he says, "Well, I have Pixie." He said, do you think my mom is hallucinating?" And of course, you just can't come out and say, "No, I don't think she's hallucinating. I think that loved ones do come to help people, their loved ones cross over. They don't cross over alone." But of course, I can't say that, professionally. So I handed the question back and I said to him, I said, "Well, do you think she's hallucinating?" And he said, "Well, I don't know." And I said, "Well, let me just try something." I said, "Edna, can I ask George a question?" And she nodded her head yes. And I said, "George, what color is your son's shirt?" Now, keep in mind that this woman is totally, totally blind. And she said, "Yellow." And he was, in fact, wearing a Ralph Lauren yellow pastel polo shirt. And he immediately got it. He said, "Hi, Dad." He realized that his father's presence was in the room. And the thing about this period of time is so many times people miss this very special time where they can also communicate with the other side themselves. They're wrapped up in grieving and their loss, and they miss it because the person that's transitioning, the filters he faced, And they can hear the telepathy from the spirits on the other side, as well as they can hear the embodied souls, the humans on this side speaking, and they can answer for them. And, you know, there have been so many times that people have said, I wish that I could just tell so-and-so that I love them one more time, or tell them that I'm sorry, or ask, you know, Uncle Joe what he did with the clock. This is your time. This is your time. And you can get a response through the person that's transitioning. Oh, Uncle Joe, you know, he left it in the bathroom corner on the floor, you know, the clock or whatever. And people do miss this very beautiful time where they can communicate with the other side themselves. And I've got, again, so many, still some other stories that I'd like to share if you'd like me to continue.
Okay, sure.
Okay, yeah. I had also, a lot of times they start seeing beings even as much as a year before the time they start to cross. They'll start talking about seeing people that have crossed over. I had one lady in particular who had Alzheimer's. And the facility that I worked for, I had been there for about 7 years. And I remember her when she was up walking around talking and, you know, visiting with people. And here she is now, it's been 3 years and she has not spoken one word. And I see her coming down the hallway in her wheelchair, kind of tooling along with her feet. And she stops in front of the nursing station. And I noticed, I said, oh, there's Shirley, you know, she's looking down the hallway at something. I'm like, oh, she's just looking at something. And I went back to pull my charts and to get ready to do my med pass. And all of a sudden I hear this woman yelling, take me home, please, please take me home. Well, I come out into the nurse's station and I look down each hallway and there's nothing there. And I figured, because the person had stopped yelling, that maybe one of the other nurses or the CNAs had gone in to check on the person and they were okay. So I turned my back and I started to go back into the area to finish getting ready to do my med pass. And all of a sudden, again, I hear, take me home, please, please take me home. And when I turned around, it was Shirley. I hadn't heard her voice in 3 years. It was her calling, take me home. So I came out of the nurse's station and I stand next to her and I said, Miss Shirley, I said, who are you asking to take you home? And she was facing a hallway to my right where there was a woman that was actively passing in that hallway on the first door, also on the right. And Shirley points down and she says, look at the angels. Aren't they beautiful? And I looked down the hallway, and of course, I first didn't see anything, but then I looked again, and there was this woman's loved ones and angels just bulging out of the wall into the hallway that were coming to help the woman transition over. And of course, she passed away within about 30 minutes after that point as well. But it's amazing. You know, there are 3 kinds of death. There's a natural death, which most of us have. There is a sudden death, which is handled differently on the other side. Of course, with a sudden death, they don't come in with the whole reception thing, because it would be a little bit overwhelming for a spirit, you know, when their sudden death is sometimes a shock for them too. And they're standing there bargaining with God to have one more breath and crawl back into their body, to have the whole team come along with this beautiful reception. So usually one spirit is sent in that is familiar to them, and they kind of help guide them in the direction. And they kind of help them to understand that they have passed away, and that they also kind of go through a little bit of a grieving period after this thing is not staying in my ear, after this type of thing has occurred. And then, of course, once they have that acceptance that they have passed away, then the reception does come forward. They get to see their family. Our pets are on the other side too, so we get to have a reunion with all of our fur babies, or you know, other kinds of babies if you've had other kinds of non-fur babies. But yeah, definitely. And also, it just there's also then a near-death experience, which then is also handled differently. And a lot of people have talked about that. I had a near-death experience that was very, very brief. I had a surgery and a vessel was nicked in my chest that was bleeding. And I did have that out of body experience and floating up through, and I was in the glistening tunnel of stars. And I remember I kind of stopped on a cloud, or it seemed like I stopped on a cloud, and I'm bargaining, saying, no, I'm a single mother. I've got a 4-year-old. I need to go home. You know, my baby needs me. And of course, it wasn't my time. So they did tell me that that I needed to go back. But my father had a more profound near-death experience. He had actually gone to the doctor, and he had a bulging vessel in his eye that was indicative of a clot somewhere, occluding a major vessel. So they immediately sent him over to the hospital. He had some tests, and they found that the clot was moving pretty quick for a clot, and it was too big. They didn't have time to dissolve it. So they went ahead and they surgically removed it. And my father made it through the surgery. He did fine. When he got into the recovery room, he had this overwhelming feeling. He had this person talking to him saying, no, don't take that. And the nurse was standing with putting morphine in his IV for pain. And he blurted out, no, I don't want that. And she said, what? This is for pain. You don't want this? And he said, no, but it was too late. She had already put it through the IV. And he said that everything went dark and that he could feel himself floating. He remembers being near the ceiling, actually turning over, watching the crash carts come in. And then he continued up through the ceiling. He was also in the tunnel that was very warm and loving, and the glistening gold or silver stars, they were metallic looking, glistening. And he said that he was also aware of presences of other people also floating kind of in farther distances. And he spoke of that. But the one thing that he told me that was very, very interesting is the fact that he was able to be at 6 places simultaneously. He had 6 children. Of course, my sister had already passed away. He was able to see her, but he was not able to communicate with her. He saw her just standing smiling, which when you're going to be sent back, you usually don't get that communication, even if you do get to see your loved ones, because you are coming back. He did have part of his life review. He was with each of us children, the 5 remaining children, plus his new wife. And he even told me the shirt that I had on that day. And it was my favorite shirt. And he lived in a different state. He had never seen it before, but he was correct. And it was one that I was wearing. And but he then reflected on his new wife that he had only been married to for 6 months. She had come from Russia, and she didn't know how to drive, didn't know how to balance a checkbook. And he was given the option to either continue or return, and he chose to return. But also, in his life review, my father was a very difficult man. He was a raging alcoholic. He was physically abusive. He hurt a lot of people. He was a very intelligent man, but he was not a God-fearing man. He didn't believe in God or a creator for that matter. And having that life review changed him. When he came back, he remembered coming back in through the ceiling and going into his body, and he could feel the weight of his body as well as the pain from the surgery. And after he came out of the hospital, he stopped drinking, immediately stopped drinking. He apologized to his children. He apologized to his ex-wife, and he became this very, very humble, very loving, kind man for the remainder of his life. So it really changed him. And his near-death experience scared the daylights out of him because he was so awful, and he was made to reflect on that and to connect with not only his actions, but the rippling effect of the actions that it placed on the other person and the pain that it caused. And he said that on the other side, there was someone with him, that he was there judging himself. They weren't judging him, he was judging himself at that point in time. And he said that, and really, if you think about it, it would be more effective, because if somebody's standing there shaking their finger at you saying, you did a naughty deed, I mean, we're all in our head rationalizing all the reasons why we did it. Well, I did it because she was mean to me first, or because they cut me off in traffic. When you are judging yourself and you are made to feel what what the effects of what you've done to others, you have to live it. Is if you're in their shoes, you have to own it. And it is, and for some people, it's rough to go through that, depending on how nasty you were to people. But he did talk about that when he came back. And also, a thing about people with death and dying is they can choose to cross over or not. Usually, the only thing that prevents you from crossing over is yourself. You can choose not to. And I've had a couple of experiences with things like that as well. Sometimes, usually the people that choose not to cross over are the ones that are roaming the earth, the lost souls, or the people that are haunting your house. And when they present with the cause of death still showing. They still have mental illness. They still have their addiction issues. They have all of their senses, whether they cross over or not. They still have all of their senses, but they don't. When you cross over, those other things perfect themselves in the sense that your body, you're not showing like. When I see people that have died from cancer that are souls that have not crossed over, they appear with a Swiss cheese appearance to wherever the area was that they had cancer, because it still shows. So I have a for instance too that I'll share with you in a minute. But a lot of times people, they choose not to cross over because maybe they're caring for an ailing loved one and they think that the loved one's going to pass away before they do, and then something happens and they cross over first, so they continue their duty and worry, over the person that is still here. Or sometimes it's a pet, maybe it's a child that's left behind or something like that. And then when that person passes, the loved one gets left behind here and gets stuck here. So, and a lot of times they do lose their way and they just need a little bit of help finding it, which usually when you see spirits that are lost, they're looking forward or side to side or down, but they don't look upward. And if they are just told to look upward, that cord that connects them will reattach and they can then cross over. But I have a funny story. There was a man, I was at the facility working, I was at my med cart, and I'm in front of this lady's room that's actively passing. And there's this sitting area with pillars, and where the pillars where I see this spirit of this man peeking around the pillar. And I'm like, hi. And he's kind of looking over his shoulder to see who I'm talking to, because he appeared, the way that he appeared to maybe have been like the 1800s. He wasn't rich, but he wasn't poor because he did have nice clothes on. And I'm like, no, you there, why haven't you crossed over? And he realizes that I'm talking to him. So he kind of comes towards my cart a little bit. And I said to him, I said, this lady here's getting ready to pass, and I can hook you up. Not that you have to be hooked up. I just wanted him to know, here are the angels and things like that here for this other person. And maybe we can, if you don't want to go alone, you can have, follow them. I'm sure that they would help you. And he just, he told me he was a handsome man too. He looked to be about 35. He had a Swiss cheese area to his abdomen off to the side, which again indicates to me that he died of a corrosive disease of maybe cancer or cirrhosis of the liver. And he was a handsome fellow. And he said to me, he had this very, very heavy Irish brogue. And he said to me, lady, I can't cross over. And I said, oh, sure you can. Of course you can cross over. Why can't you cross over? And he said, because my wife and my mistress are on the other side and neither one knew about the other. So here this man has stayed earthbound all of these years because he didn't want to cross over and have to be confronted by his wife and girlfriend, who now obviously know about each other. He was afraid to do that. And a lot of times too, people will choose not to cross over because of religious beliefs that have been instilled where they don't feel worthy to cross over, or they feel afraid, that it's not going to work out well for them if they do, so they choose to stay here. So I thought that was an interesting thing. And even with my mom being on the other side, we do have communication. And I remember my mother passed away in July, and she had always made the the Thanksgiving turkey. And so now the responsibility fell to me to make the turkey, and I had never made one before. So I'm prepping this turkey, and I hear my mother come through like a megaphone, and she says to me, she says, "Don't forget the aluminum foil." And I'm like, I don't need any aluminum foil. I want one of those nice brown turkeys like the ones they have on TV. So here I thought, smarty pants over here, thinking I was doing something so much better than her. And I found out really quick that my breast got burnt and my legs were still raw. So I needed that aluminum foil to even out the cooking. And we ended up having hamburgers for Thanksgiving because I ruined the turkey. But and of course, I had to say I was sorry to her. But there was another time that I had made mention to her. I said, "Mom, don't you ever miss the taste of potato salad or those brownies that you used to make, or like barbecue ribs?" And she came through again like a megaphone, and she said, "Well, here we don't eat." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I know you don't eat." And she said, "Here we do everything by thought." She said, "If we want to go somewhere, we think of where we want to go and we just go. If we are wanting to be with someone or someone is thinking of us, we go." She said, and with food, she said, if we are desiring to experience something that we enjoyed on the earthly plane, like food, like the brownies or potato salad, all that we have to do is think of it. And the sensation and the flavor of it comes to us as if we are eating it. And I thought that was a really cool idea because, I mean, wouldn't that be neat for here? We can eat whatever we want with no calories, you know? So I thought that that was a really cool thing that she conveyed. And again, you know, people, as I had mentioned before, when they're doing that rallying thing, a lot of times too, they will come back and they will talk about seeing children that haven't been born. I had, and if you'd like me to continue with that, I'll be happy to.
Sure.
Okay. I had a patient that was actively passing, and she had her daughter Susan in the room, and her daughter was late 40s, maybe 50 years old, and she was an only child. And her mother speaks up, and I'm in the room with this for this conversation. The mother says, "There's a little boy here calling me grandma." And Susan's like, "Well, I'm an only child, and I'm not married, and I don't have a boyfriend, and I'm in menopause, so I don't know why you'd have a little boy in here calling you grandma." And she said, "No, there is a little boy here, and he's calling me grandma, and he looks just like you." And of course, Susan kind of chuckled and let it go. And lo and behold, that same day, she had gone to the break room and ran across this gentleman whose wife had just passed away, and he was waiting for the rest of his family to arrive. And they made friends and kind of supported each other and called each other for a year, just platonically. And then he finally asked her out, and she accepted. And 6 months later, they were married. And lo and behold, about 4 months after that, 6 months after that, she started to feel sick and went to the doctor. I mean, pregnancy at her age, being in menopause, would have been a miracle. And, you know, the last thing on her mind was that she was pregnant, but she did, in fact, turn out to be pregnant, and she did have a little boy. So, and it was healthy. I mean, by the time she had it, she was actually like 51 years old, but the baby was fine. And she had another relative go through my unit. So I got to see her with the little boy, and she shared the story with me. And that was one. And I had another one that was similar, where I had a young lady that was maybe in her middle 40s, and her aunt was saying to her, she was saying, "When are you going to have those little girls?" Whoops, sorry, just lost my speaker again. I don't know why these keep falling. You know what? Let me just take this out so you can hear me. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you fine, yeah.
Okay, good. Then that way they won't keep falling out. She says to her niece, she says, "When are you going to have those babies? I want to see those babies before I go home to Jesus." And I'm in the room, I'm overhearing this conversation, and the niece says to her aunt, and she said, "Well, I've been trying for 25 years to have a baby, and I'm in menopause." She says, "I can't have children. I think it's nice." And then the lady interrupts her aunt interrupts her, and she says, "No, these are two little girls, and I see you holding them, one in each arm, and I want to see these babies before I go home to Jesus." So again, she comes back and she says, oh, well, that would be a nice thought, but it's impossible. I can't have children anymore. I'm in menopause. And the woman insisted. And even when the woman a couple of days later started to go through that more of a rallying stage and transition stage, she had that one more period where she kind of perked up when her family arrived. And there was a hospice nurse in the room with her. And the first thing out of her mouth when she perked up is, where are those babies? I want to see those babies. And she ended up, of course, passing away. But about 6 months later, I see the niece, whose uncle is now on the unit, coming in, and she's got this baby bump. And it turns out that she was pregnant with identical twin girls. She had been pregnant when her aunt was mentioning the girls and didn't know it. So she found out shortly after that she was pregnant. But the thing that was interesting is that the aunt described the little girls. She said that they had ringlet, light colored hair, chocolate brown colored eyes, and dimples, and that they resembled her quite a bit because she had dimples and the brown eyes too, but her hair was a little bit darker. And lo and behold, when she had the babies, because her uncle went through, then her father went through, and one other relative went through my unit, I got to see the babies. I got to see the girls as babies. I got to see them toddling. I got to see them at around 5, 6 years old. And lo and behold, they did. They had blonde curls, beautiful, big, loopy curls, brown eyes and dimples. And the older they got, they did look like the mother. So a lot of times, I mean, you can learn so much from a person that is actively passing away if you are just able to listen and to feel comfortable with the fact that they're not really dead. They don't die. They simply shed their skin and go. And they're still very much with you, very much around you. They're there for all of the graduations. They're there for all the weddings. They're present. Sometimes they're even sitting in a seat if there's one empty. They usually don't sit on top of people, keeping in mind that they can be in 6 places simultaneously. So they can be at the breakfast table with your brother and be in the car with you on the way to work. Also at the same time, people can feel them, smell them. They can move things. My mother and I, we had a pact that we made prior to her crossing. And I said to her, I said, you know, Mom, life is so stressful. I really, really want to know when you come to visit me that you're here. Because my mother had cancer. She had stopped treatment. And we started going through checking off her bucket list as much as we could, visiting friends. My mother ate lasagna at her favorite restaurant every week, you know, up until she passed away. So, and she had her appetite because she wasn't on the chemo and stuff anymore. So we went through old pictures and old recipes and took that time, you know, to really, really make sure that we honed in on that pinch of something so that we would have the perfect flavor for holidays and have a piece of my mom still there. But I had asked her, I said, Mom, someday when you cross over and I'm stressed out and you're there and I'm not even connecting, I'm not realizing that you're there, would you please leave me one of your hairs? Now she had long hair like mine, wavy, but it was opalescent white. It was beautiful, white, long pearlescent hair. And on the day of her funeral, I drew a bath. I put some bubbles in it to kind of relax in. And when I went in to get into the tub, laid lengthwise on the top of the bubbles, no curls or anything, just lengthwise, was one of my mother's hairs. And, you know, it may have been a fluke that it got there, but to me it was comforting. And I believe that she left it for me or drew my attention to it so that I would. And there was one other time also that was very, very profound that I was able to have her connect with me in that way. And I might add too, even this past Thanksgiving, I found one of her hairs across one of the chairs at the table. So she's still leaving these hairs. And she's been gone for 7 years and hasn't even been in the house that I'm living in now. But I had gone back to school to further my education, and I was taking a class. I had gone to the bookstore at the school, bought a 3-ring binder and the loose leaf papers that were supposed to go in it for the class. And I then returned, I then went straight to the classroom from the bookstore, and I drove my car over there. And that particular day we were having a test, and it was a hard test. There were only 2 tests in this class. So you had to do well on both or you were out. And it was the second one, and the first one I had made like a high C on, so I really had to do well on this test. And so I'm stressing over it, and I come to my desk and I take my 3-ring binder out and I take the loose leaf papers out and I open the 3-ring binder to put the loose leaf papers inside. And I would fight God for my children. I don't know what parent wouldn't if they were told that they were going to be taken. You definitely would negotiate for your kids, not to have them taken. And I swear on my children's lives, what I'm telling you is the truth. You can believe it or not, but it was comforting to me. When I opened that 3-ring binder, in the middle, in that center ring of the 3 rings, looped in the teeth of that 3-ring binder was one of my mother's long, beautiful pearlescent hairs. Now, there is no way that it could have gotten in there. And even if it was some fluke thing, it was comforting to me. But I mean, there was no way. I went straight from the bookstore. They put my things in the bag. There were 100 different notebooks for me to choose from, and I picked one and didn't look in it. And I just had paid for it and had them put it in the bag. And I went straight from the store to my desk at school and opened it. There is no way. So you can make a pact with people when they're getting ready to pass, of ways that they can come back to you so that you know for sure that they've been there or that they are there. Ladybugs, they can move feathers. They use symbols all of the time. And even if the person has already crossed over, they can hear you the same way as I'm talking to you now. They can hear you, and you can still make that pact where they can leave something, an individual item, or like to see a ladybug in the middle of winter would be unusual, but it can also be a picture of a ladybug in a magazine that will bring your attention to that, ways that they communicate with us from the other side. So I thought that was interesting too. So,
Do you share this with your coworkers, your stories?
I do, and they share their stories with me, because being in end-of-life care, it's fortunate that a lot of the nurses are becoming more empathic with their abilities. Some of them are not. They're creeped out by it, but some of them are. And I do share them at work, as a matter of fact. And the thing about it is no one has ever come forward and said anything negative to me about it. I've never had anybody, even comments on some things. People may not agree with it, but they don't come back with horrible comments. And a lot of times what I'm finding more so than anything is that people come forward to me and say, hey, listen, when I was a little kid, there was a rocking chair in my grandmother's upstairs bedroom, and it used to move itself out into the hallway in the middle of the night by itself. And I've never told anybody this, but I feel that I can share that with you. So there are a lot of things, and being able to connect with people of like mind about this issue has been a wonderful thing, of being supportive, of being able to see dead people, being able to see spirits and things like that. That way, some of the things that do bother me a little bit is, like, I did do a rotation when I was advancing my degree, and I was in a psychiatric ward, and there was this sweet lady who was sitting at a table with 4 chairs, and she was in one of the chairs, and she was talking to each of the chairs like there were people sitting in them, and she was having conversations with them. Well, I could see that there were people sitting in those chairs. There were spirits sitting in those chairs that she was seeing, and no one else could see them. So they were like, oh, she's got schizophrenia, she's just, talking to people that aren't there, but there really were people there. So, things like that kind of, it's hard at a time, because you can't come out and say, oh, no, there are really people there. Because in that moment, they probably put you in the institution too.
With her.
Yeah. But I'm glad that it is. I'm hoping to get this more out, for people, and a lot of people do come forward and say, yes, I've experienced that. Yes, I've seen my loved one reaching up into the air when they've been crossing. Yes, I've heard them talking to Uncle Larry in the room, and we thought that it was hallucinating. I'm hoping that this awareness will help people to be more comfortable with the act of death and dying themselves, and understand that they're not really gone. When they take that last breath, that is not the last time you will see them. That's not the last time you will see your pet or your loved one. You will see them again, and it may be sooner than you think. So they're not gone.
Yeah. And people can have a beautiful death.
They can have a beautiful, and a lot of them do. I mean, most of them do. The only thing that I've seen in my profession that's kind of sad that way is a lot of times if a person is diagnosed, let's say, with cancer, and they're given 6 weeks to live, instead of taking that 6 weeks and telling others that they love them, and giving things to them, look, I wanted to make sure that you got this. This is your grandmother's clock, and I want you to have this. Being able to give those items individually to people that they want them to have those things, and to hug them one more time, and to have that one more laugh and giggle together, type thing. They take the information instead of doing that, and they literally get into bed, curl up in fetal position, and literally wait for death to happen. They die in that moment, and they don't live the rest of their life, that last 6 weeks, while they have the opportunity to still have some joy and love for people, and to enjoy some food that they like, and, love on their pet, and also to get things in order. If you're a husband, and your wife is going to be left alone, and you need to have a roof repair, well, it's time to get it done. If there's anything that you need to do to make her life easier while you're gone, make sure that your checking account that you mutually have has both of your names on it correctly, so that when you pass, it needs to say and, not or. Mrs. and Mr., or Mr. and, but not or. Because if it says or, they'll close the account down, and then leaves your loved one with no access to funds. Make a list of where those boxes in the bank are, and what the serial numbers are, and where your life insurance policy is, and who to call with it. Maybe even put a number on a piece of paper, because they're in grief and suffering the loss. It's hard for them to even focus. So anything that you can do to make it easier for them, knowing that your time is coming very, very close, that, is a very loving, kind act towards them, that will come back to you in a positive way on the other side. So, and that's another thing too. It's so important. People, they go through life, they say, okay, well, I pay my taxes, I don't speed, I donate clothes to the Goodwill. Well, those are nice things to do. However, it's not the kind of act that makes the difference. It's those selfless, kind, loving acts that you do from your heart that make that difference. Like picking up the box of kittens on the side of the road and making sure that they get to someplace safe so that they can find a home. Helping that little old lady whose yard is overgrown, to mow it for her because she can't afford to pay somebody to do it, and she can't do it herself. Or even tipping the pizza person an extra $20. That person might be working to pay their light bill. All of those moments come back to you. Daniel Brinkley is an author I think that all of us know. He wrote a beautiful book about he's had a near-death experience, I believe, 2 different times, I think maybe even a 3rd time now. But he's written books about all of those. And his most recent near-death experience, he made mention that, he came back and he was hugging people. And people are like, wow, you've really become a hugger. And he says, well, I'm not hugging you, I'm hugging me. Because when I get on the other side, all of these hugs that I've given, I'm going to get to feel all of those hugs come back, and all of that feel-good feeling. So it is really, really important, those kind, selfless, loving acts. And you will get to not only feel the appreciation from the person, but you'll get to also see the rippling effect of good that you've created beyond that scope as well, which also is a very, very beautiful thing. So yeah, it's important to do good things.
Well, thank you. It's been very informative.
Well, thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and you look beautiful. You look amazing.
Oh, so do
So
you.
I'm glad that you had me on, and I look forward to seeing you again sometime down the road.
Yeah. It was, like I say, it's been a year, 2 days, exactly 1 year since you were on here on my channel. So lots changed in a year.
Yeah. We both changed for the better too. We look, we've changed in good ways. So yeah, we definitely. I'm happy. I'm so happy that you have had me back on your show.
And
So
I'll list your
I do
books
have
in the description.
part.
I'll list your books
Pardon
in
me.
your description. I will list your books in your description.
Okay. Alrighty. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you. Feel free to reach out too if ever you need a fill-in. I don't mind.
Okay.
If ever you need somebody to come on, even if it's last minute, somebody cancels and you're like, hey, I'll just reach out to Lynn and see what she's doing. Maybe she can come on. So I
Okay.
appreciate it.
All
I
right.
send you much love and light, beautiful lady. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to the audience for listening to this. I truly, truly hope that it helps bring some comfort to someone who may be suffering from terminal illness or has lost a loved one, especially at this time. There's been so much loss, and around the holidays too. That's my intention for it to help in that way. So,
All right. All right.
okay.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.